Please make sure the loan repayment is handled properly. While I was busy at work, an unexpected email popped up that changed my life. In a panic, I reached out to my husband, Brandon. When he finally answered, he calmly explained the shocking truth. "Oh, sorry, but I've fallen for someone else and decided to start a new life with her." My heart sank. To make matters worse, Brandon revealed that he was planning to take the luxury car we had recently purchased. The car, however, was in my name, and I had taken out a loan for it. Despite my efforts to convince him otherwise, Brandon ignored me, hung up abruptly, and cut off all communication. In the end, Brandon vanished with his new partner, leaving behind a massive debt for me to deal with. As a mother to our 8-year-old son, I could have never imagined being in such an unfair and painful situation. At 31 years old, I was completely lost, not knowing what to do. My mind went blank. My name is Brenda, and my husband Brandon is the same age. We were once a family of 4, including our smart and curious 8-year-old son, Jeremy. Jeremy has always been bright, reading articles online and even asking me for advice on complex topics from a young age. In contrast, Brandon had always been unstable. He could never keep a steady job. I was the one working full-time, worrying about our future, but somehow, Brandon had managed to maintain a stable income for the past 5 years. Recently, he had been talking about creating special memories as a family, which led us to the decision to buy a $75,000 camper van. However, since Brandon couldn't qualify for the loan due to his unstable credit, I had to take it out in my name. On the day we were eagerly waiting for the delivery of the camper van, everything fell apart. I received an email from Brandon out of the blue. In the message, he casually mentioned that he would be taking the camper van as the loan was in my name and I would be responsible for paying it off. Confused and heartbroken, I called him right away. What I heard next shattered me. Brandon confessed, "I've fallen in love with another woman and decided to start dating her. At first, I thought it was just a fling, but it became serious. So, I've decided to start a new life with her." He didn't stop there. He brought up the divorce papers we had once talked about during an argument and told me he would go ahead and file them. Then, without warning, he hung up, leaving me in complete shock. This was the moment I realized my life had changed forever. I felt utterly betrayed by Brandon. His sudden departure hit me like a shocking blow, leaving me in disbelief. Despite my repeated attempts to contact him, through emails and calls, I received no response. Each time I tried, I hoped for even a shred of explanation, but it was like he had disappeared completely. When I came home from work one day, I checked the drawer where our divorce papers had been kept, and to my dismay, they were already gone. My heart sank further, knowing I was now left with the weight of a $75,000 car loan in my name, a debt I would have to face alone. The silence from Brandon was unbearable. Days passed, and there was still no word from him. Jeremy, my 8-year-old son, began to notice something was wrong. He could sense the shift in my behavior, even though I tried to mask my pain. After dinner one evening, he approached me with a concerned look on his face. "Mom, what's wrong? You haven't been eating much lately. Are you okay?" Caught off guard, I forced a smile. Yeah, maybe I'm just tired." Jeremy, ever observant, wasn't convinced. When people lie, they look up to the right. Lying is bad. "I've noticed Dad hasn't been home for 5 days. Did something happen between you two?" His sharp words startled me, and I realized I couldn't hide the truth any longer. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I knew it was time to tell Jeremy what had happened. "Jeremy, your dad, he left us." Jeremy listened quietly as I explained everything, his expression calm, as if he had already expected it. "I see," he said after a moment. "It's just like Dad to do something like that. Aren't you sad?" I paused, unsure of how to answer. "Of course I'm sad, Jeremy," I said softly. "But I'll be okay. We'll be okay." Jeremy, surprisingly composed for his age, shrugged slightly. "I kind of understood from how things were going," he said, as though he had already come to terms with the situation. Though Jeremy appeared unconcerned on the surface, I knew deep down he must have felt the sadness too. I could see it in his eyes, the way they avoided mine, the way he tried to seem indifferent. As his mother, I could feel the weight he carried, and it broke my heart. Silently, I apologized to him in my mind, feeling powerless and overwhelmed. As the days went by, I struggled to cope with everything. My body, however, refused to cooperate. The emotional stress began to take its toll, and my health started to deteriorate. One day at work, there was a training session scheduled, but I couldn't bring myself to stand up. My legs felt weak, and I ended up crouching down, unable to go on. "I'm sorry. I can't stand up right now," I whispered to a nearby colleague, feeling dizzy and faint. "I need to take a break." The voices of my coworkers surrounded me, filled with concern, but I couldn't respond. My body gave in and I collapsed. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in a hospital room, the sterile white walls and beeping machines reminding me that I had pushed myself too far. The doctor informed me that I needed more detailed examinations and that I had been admitted for stress-related exhaustion. Lying there, staring at the 4 drip in my arm and the white ceiling above, I couldn't help but feel pathetic. How had I let things get this bad? Tears began to flow down my cheeks, and I didn't bother wiping them away. I felt utterly defeated. At that moment, Jeremy rushed into the room, his usual calm demeanor replaced with panic. His worried face brought me back to reality, and I quickly wiped away my tears, not wanting him to see me like this. "Mom, what happened?" Jeremy asked, his voice trembling with fear. "Is it serious? You're not going to die, right?" I smiled weakly, reaching out to reassure him. "Of course not, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. I wouldn't leave my dear son alone." Jeremy let out a sigh of relief, his face softening a little. "That's good." "Really? I was called by the school and told you were taken to the hospital." I was so shocked, my heart nearly stopped. Seeing my son, so mature for his age yet still just a child, made me realize how much I needed to fight for him. I needed to get better, not just for myself, but for him. But as much as I wanted to be strong, I couldn't deny that my condition was worse than I had let on. The road to recovery would be long, but with Jeremy by my side, I knew I had to find the strength to keep going. I was diagnosed with a serious illness, and the doctor didn't hesitate to share the urgency of the situation. "You should have surgery as soon as possible," the doctor said. "Please make a decision quickly." Faced with this unexpected news, I followed the doctor's advice and underwent surgery. By the time I was discharged from the hospital, a whole month had passed since Brandon had left. Although I was relieved that the surgery had gone well, my troubles were far from over. When I returned home, I opened the mailbox and found a demand letter for the car loan payment. My heart raced with panic. The payments were supposed to be automatically deducted from my account. Why hadn't they been paid? Without delay, I grabbed my cash card and rushed to check my account balance, hoping this was just a mistake. To my shock, the $55,000 I had saved was now reduced to just $55. My thoughts swirled in confusion and anger. Brandon did this, I thought to myself. He must have drained the account. I wanted so badly to contact him, to ask him to return the money. But I had no way to reach him. Brandon had disappeared, and I was left with nothing. I couldn't sell the camper van to recover any money because Brandon had taken it with him when he left. I felt completely trapped, as if everything in my life was falling apart. Since Brandon left, everything seemed to be going in a downward spiral. My mood sank lower and lower, feeling weighed down by this series of misfortunes. Seeing me so distressed, Jeremy came over and gently placed his hand on my forehead. "You look pale, Mom," he said with concern. "Are you feeling sick again? You don't seem to have a fever, though." I smiled weakly at him, appreciating his thoughtfulness. "I'm fine physically, Jeremy, but there's more. Your father didn't just take the camper van. He also took all the money we had saved. I'm in no condition to work right now, and without that money, I don't know how we're going to make it." My voice trembled as I spoke, and I felt completely lost. Jeremy listened quietly, his eyes wide with understanding. After a moment, he spoke. "I see. Well, I can help. I'll start delivering newspapers, or maybe search the internet for any jobs I can do." His words, spoken with such determination, filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in days. My 8-year-old son, so young yet so responsible, was offering to help in ways I had never expected. His encouragement lifted my spirits, and I realized I couldn't give in to despair. "Thank you, Jeremy," I said softly. "I'm sorry for worrying you. I can't afford to be weak. I'll change my mindset and try to do whatever I can. We'll figure this out." I smiled at him, and he smiled back, his face lighting up with hope. Then, to my surprise, Jeremy said something unexpected. "Let's plan how to get the camper van back from Dad." His suggestion caught me off guard. "How can we do that?" I asked, curious but doubtful. "Well, the camper van is in your name, right?" he said. "Yes, but what does that matter?" I responded, still unsure where he was going with this. Jeremy thought for a moment and then said, "Maybe we can do something about that. Also, I have an idea. Even though we don't know where Dad is right now, we can still track him down." "How?" I asked, intrigued. Jeremy reminded me of something I had forgotten. "Remember the GPS app we installed on my phone a while back when we went hiking as a family? We bought that kid's phone on a suggestion because I got lost. You and Dad both had access to the app, so you could see my location at all times. Well, I can still see where Dad is in real time." I stared at Jeremy, amazed by his thoughtfulness. "Is that really possible?" I asked. "Yeah, I've been checking it for a while. Dad's been moving around a lot, but we can definitely find him." My mind raced. It seemed like a solution was within reach, but doubts still lingered. But what if we find him, and he just says something vague again? What if he escapes, and I'm left with nothing? Jeremy looked up at me, calm but determined. "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, Mom. But we can't just do nothing. We've got to at least try." His confidence gave me the strength to believe there was still hope, even in the midst of all this chaos. Though I was nervous, I felt a glimmer of determination return. With Jeremy by my side, I knew we had a chance to confront Brandon and maybe, just maybe, regain control over the mess he had left behind. I thought about what Jeremy said, and before I could respond, he smiled and made an intriguing suggestion. "Don't worry, Mom. I've already taken precautions." "What did you just say?" I asked, completely astonished. To my shock, while I was in the hospital, Jeremy had taken matters into his own hands and achieved something incredible. I couldn't believe it. How could such a smart, capable child have come from me? I was simply amazed by his resourcefulness and intelligence. It turned out Jeremy had even learned about Brandon's mistress. "All right," Jeremy said with determination. "Let's teach Dad a lesson for betraying us." I nodded, and together, we began to plan. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope and strength. With Jeremy by my side, I was filled with confidence. With you beside me, Jeremy, I feel invincible. Bring it on, Brandon, anywhere, anytime. 6 days later, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and answered. "Hello. It's me. Please, I need your help." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the voice on the other end. "Oh, and who might this be?" "Don't play dumb. It's your husband, obviously." Brandon sounded desperate. "I'm being questioned by the police about you. If this keeps up, they might ask me to come to the station voluntarily. Help me out." "Is that so?" I replied, my tone calm. "Just wait a moment then." I hung up and turned to Jeremy, telling him it was time. Together, we went to the location Brandon had mentioned. To my surprise, he was at a nearby forest park, a place where people often went camping. When we arrived, Brandon was standing by the camper van, looking confused and surrounded by police officers. Seeing him like that, I couldn't help but sigh. Brandon looked pathetic, standing there bewildered. I approached the officers and calmly asked them to give us a moment to talk as a family. They agreed, stepping back to give us some space. Brandon, clearly uncomfortable with the eyes of strangers on him, urged us to get into the camper van. Inside, I noticed Brandon's mistress sitting there, legs crossed, glaring at us. But honestly, I didn't care about her anymore. She was the least of my concerns. "Thanks for coming," Brandon muttered. "But why did the police suddenly show up here? I don't get it." That's because I filed a report about the missing camper van, I explained, keeping my voice steady. Brandon's eyes widened in disbelief.
What?
Why would you do that? I shook my head. Isn't it obvious? My car was stolen. Brandon stammered, clearly confused. But I didn't steal it. We're married. Spouses can't steal from each other. I sighed deeply. The world doesn't work that way, Brandon. You filed for divorce, remember? We're no longer a couple. You're driving someone else's car without permission, that's a crime. Brandon's face went pale. He seemed stunned, unable to process what was happening. But I didn't steal it, I just borrowed it for a bit. Well, I'd like to use my car now, I said firmly. So, could you please return it? I extended my hand, waiting for the keys. Reluctantly, Brandon reached into his pocket and handed the keys over. I took them, feeling a sense of satisfaction and relief. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. After confirming the van was returned to me, Jeremy, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. Hey, Dad, he said, his voice steady. Why did you abandon your family and choose to play around with this woman? Brandon was caught off guard by Jeremy's blunt question. He scratched his head awkwardly, clearly flustered. Before he could respond, Brandon's mistress chuckled smugly and chimed in. It's because, she began, her voice dripping with arrogance, as if she was about to explain everything. But at that moment, I realized something important. It didn't matter what she had to say. I had won a small but meaningful victory, and with Jeremy by my side, I knew we could face whatever came next. I'm more attractive than your mother. Can't you see it? Emma said smugly, glaring at Jeremy. He fell head over heels for me and decided to leave his family. Jeremy, unimpressed, responded firmly, quiet. I didn't ask you, old lady. Dad, you answer. Emma fell silent, clearly taken aback by Jeremy's stern tone, but Brandon still remained quiet, avoiding eye contact. If you can't explain yourself, that's fine, Jeremy continued, unbothered by the silence. I'll just call the police back to have you arrested. Wait, hold on. Okay, I'll talk, Brandon finally blurted out, clearly panicked. He glanced at Emma, and she shifted uncomfortably. Brandon then revealed the truth. Emma had joined his company 5 months ago. They were attracted to each other, and things started between them at a welcome party for new employees. Later, they found out that Emma was pregnant, and that's when Brandon made the decision to leave us behind and start a new life with her. But why did you take the camper van? Jeremy pressed, his tone calm but unyielding. Brandon sighed, looking guilty. I quit my job and thought about selling the camper van for money, but I realized you guys were using it a lot. So, I figured it was better to go on a trip before selling it. How do you know all of this? Brandon asked, his voice full of confusion. Remember when Jeremy got lost during our family hike? I reminded him. After that, we bought him a kid's cell phone and installed the GPS app for safety. You forgot that we installed the app on your phone too. So, I've known where you've been this entire time. Brandon's face fell as he realized the truth. Meanwhile, I turned to Jeremy and smiled, amazed at his cleverness. By the way, Jeremy later admitted he only pretended to get lost that day because he wanted the phone. Jeremy grinned slightly. I suspected something was off with Dad, so I made a plan to monitor him. I was taken aback by how strategic my 8-year-old was. You really are a smart kid, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. But, Jeremy, I will never become someone like your dad, a man who betrays the people who love and trust him. Brandon, faced with Jeremy's blunt honesty, had no words. He looked pitiful, unable to come up with any defense. Seeing my son, only 8 years old, thinking clearly and speaking his mind so boldly, gave me renewed strength as a mother. I knew I had to stand firm, especially when it came to settling things the right way. And now, Brandon, I said, turning to him, return the $55,000 you withdrew from our account. That was my money. Brandon crossed his arms, his voice turning defensive. That was our joint property as a couple. I don't have to return it. No, it wasn't, I shot back. That money was what I had saved, little by little, since I was single. You've always quit your jobs halfway through, so we never saved money together. I was shocked and appalled that Brandon and his mistress had squandered the $55,000 I had worked so hard to save. In that moment, any lingering doubt I had about divorcing him vanished. I felt relieved to be free of someone so irresponsible. Brandon, realizing he had no excuse, sighed deeply. "So, what now?" he asked, defeated. "Well," I said calmly, "if you stole and used the camper van and my money, that's a serious crime. But I just sent the police away. So, it's not their business anymore, right?" Brandon said, his voice trembling. "I told the police we would talk," I replied. "I never said I would withdraw the complaint." Brandon's face went pale as the gravity of the situation set in. I could see he finally understood that his actions had consequences, and there was no escaping them this time. With Jeremy by my side, I felt strong. We had come through so much, but now it was time to move forward and put Brandon and everything he had taken from us behind. I should add the theft of my money to the police report, I thought aloud. "Mom, should I call the police now?" Jeremy asked, his finger hovering over the button on his phone, ready to make the call with a single press. Brandon's mistress, Emma, had been silently watching our conversation from inside the camper van. But as soon as Jeremy mentioned the police, she tried to bolt out of the van. Just as she reached the door, she let out a loud scream that echoed through the park. Standing right outside the van were her parents, faces red with anger, looking like they were about to explode. Startled, Emma froze and stumbled back inside, her face pale. "I'm sorry. Don't be so mad." "But why are you here, Mom and Dad?" she stammered. Jeremy smiled calmly. "I called your parents beforehand." Emma's eyes widened. "You did what?" The truth was, during my stay in the hospital, Jeremy had taken matters into his own hands. He visited Brandon's old office and, in tears, told them, "My dad left our home with a woman and my mom collapsed." Seeing Jeremy's sorrow and desperation, the people at the office suspected it might have been Emma. They confirmed it when they gave Jeremy her parents' address after mentioning that Brandon and Emma had been unusually close at work. There were even pictures of them looking like a couple at the company's welcome party for new employees. It turned out Emma was commuting from her parents' house. Jeremy took the address and paid her parents a visit, explaining everything that had happened. That's how they ended up here, waiting outside to confront their daughter. "How could you do this to me?" Emma screamed at Jeremy. "You're the worst." "I don't want to hear that from you," Jeremy replied coldly. "By the way, your stomach seems quite big. When's the baby due?" "In 5 months," Emma muttered, looking away. "Wait a minute," I said, suspicious. "That doesn't add up. You two only met 2 months ago. How is that possible?" Brandon, hearing this for the first time, turned to Emma, his eyes wide in shock. "Wait, what? What's going on, Emma? You don't get it?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "It takes about 6 months for a baby to be born, Brandon. The child she's carrying isn't yours." Brandon's face went pale as he realized what I was saying. "Emma, is that true? Have you been lying to me all along?" Emma, seeing no way out, snapped. "Ugh, I almost got away with it. But now that I'm caught, I can't hide it anymore." "You're so naive, Brandon. You believed every lie. What a fool." Brandon's shock quickly turned to anger. "Don't mock me. You've ruined my entire life," he shouted. "What were you thinking, Emma?" An ugly argument erupted between them, their voices getting louder and more heated. But no one stepped in to stop them. We all stood back and let them hash it out. While they argued, Jeremy and I calmly contacted the police again to explain the situation. As the sun began to set, the peaceful forest park was lit up by the flashing red and blue lights of police cars, signaling the end of Brandon and Emma's twisted plans. It was clear now that there was no turning back for either of them. "I was wrong, I'm sorry. Truly, I am," Brandon pleaded, his voice shaking. "I'll work hard and never cheat again. Just please, don't let them arrest me." Jeremy, standing tall beside me, didn't flinch. "Dad, people don't change that easily, especially people like you who have always been lazy." I nodded in agreement. "Jeremy's right. I can't trust you anymore. You need to face the consequences and pay for your crimes at the police station." Brandon panicked, his eyes darting around. "But if I get arrested, I won't be able to pay back the money. Is that really okay with you? I stayed calm and firm. I don't mind. Pay me back after you've atoned for what you've done. Take your time. And don't worry, I've already found you a job to help with that. You'll work to repay the $55,000 you stole from me, plus Jeremy's child support. Brandon's face fell, knowing there was no way out. I could see the realization sinking in. He had to take responsibility. Turning to Emma, the mistress, I added, and don't think you're just an innocent bystander. You're an accomplice in Brandon's theft, so be prepared to face the consequences as well. Emma's face paled. When I mentioned that she would be responsible for paying back the stolen money if Brandon couldn't, she started shaking with fear. Desperate, she turned to her parents for help, but they refused to get involved. We disown a daughter who causes trouble for others, her parents said coldly. With nowhere left to turn, Brandon and Emma were taken away in the police car together, looking defeated. Thanks to Jeremy's clever planning, we had finally managed to bring them to justice. Although they were released from detention shortly after, they now faced hefty payments to make up for what they had done. Through my lawyer, I filed a claim for $55,000 in damages, and Brandon also agreed to pay $1,500 a month in child support for Jeremy. To ensure he followed through, I introduced Brandon to a subcontracting factory where he could work. His wages would be directly deducted each month, paying off what he owed me and helping to support Jeremy. On top of that, I sold the camper van and freed myself from the burden of the auto loan. It felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I could finally breathe again. Since then, my health has improved dramatically. I feel more energetic and focused on my job. Jeremy has stepped up, helping around the house and running errands. He's growing up so fast, and I want to be the best mother I can be for him. Moving forward, I'm determined to stay strong, not just for myself, but for Jeremy. I want to create a life where he can pursue his dreams without any limitations. Together, we're building a future where we can thrive, leaving Brandon and all the hurt behind us for good.